I'll take you on a little bit of a journey getting to know two key catecholamines, dopamine and noradrenaline, and their impact on prefrontal cortex functioning. And we know the neurotransmitter dopamine is implicated as the main mediator of the brain's reinforcement signal, the reward signal. Dopamine cell bodies lie in the substantia nigra, specifically the pars compacta area, and the ventral tegmental area, VTA. The substantia nigra, let's say SN, projects to the dorsolateral striatum, and this is a key movement area, and this pathway is responsible for motor control. There are 5 key receptors, D1 to D5. These are grouped into 2 families, the D1 family and the D2 family. The D1 receptor is the most abundant of the dopamine receptors. So D1 and D2 are uniformly expressed throughout the striatum. So striatum, that sort of movement area, but it also includes the reward pathway. And they play an important part in this overall reward system. The D1 receptor, which is situated in the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, is an important regulator of cognitive functions, including spatial learning, working memory, and executive function. The D1 receptor is slightly different in terms of its dopamine affinity compared to the D2 receptor. The D2 receptor gets activated or is agonized with low levels of endogenous dopamine. D1 receptor requires very, very high levels of extracellular dopamine for activation and plays an important role in that reward aspect. Low to moderate levels of D1 receptor stimulation can improve prefrontal cortex functioning. What D1 receptor stimulation does is it decreases noise by pruning the inappropriate connections. So helps with this attention and focus because all that noise is taken out. However, excessive D1 receptor stimulation, such as that which occurs during stressful situations, actually impairs prefrontal cortex function by weakening too many network connections. We've also got to recognize that the dopamine cells tend to have 2 firing modes. There is the clock-like rhythmic firing, and 2, there is the burst-like firing in response to events which are connected with a reward. So when we are delivered an unexpected reward, it's predominantly this D1 receptor that gets stimulated. Let's look at noradrenaline. Noradrenaline in the frontal cortex mediates its activity through postsynaptic alpha-2A receptors. At moderate levels, noradrenaline can improve prefrontal cortex functioning by stimulating these postsynaptic alpha-2A receptors. Noradrenergic activation of these receptors strengthens the neuronal signal and strengthens network connectivity. However, higher levels of noradrenaline can impair prefrontal cortex function by stimulating alpha-1 receptors. Thus, dopamine and noradrenaline have complementary beneficial actions, with NA increasing the signal and DA reducing noise. And an optimal balance of both neurotransmitters is required for proper prefrontal cortex functioning. This is best thought of as a Goldilocks effect, where the porridge is not too hot, not too cold, just right. If there is too much stimulation, this can lead to mental inflexibility, stimulus-bound responses, whilst if there's too little stimulation, this results in unguided attention, with the individual being distracted with poor impulse control. At an optimal level, this results in optimal attention and impulse control. There is one additional aspect to consider because dopamine and noradrenaline also interact with glutamate. Pyramidal glutamate neurons are present in the prefrontal cortex, and glutamate is essential for optimum prefrontal cortex functioning as it plays a role in cognition. There is some evidence that there is the D4 receptor that interacts with this pyramidal glutamate neurons, and deficient stimulation of the D4 receptor can impair prefrontal cortex functioning by weakening glutamate release. Thus, to recap, we have dopamine and noradrenaline, which act on the D1 and of course D2 receptors, but in the prefrontal cortex for cognition, it's the D1 receptors that matter. Similarly, the D1 receptors in the striatum for reward. Noradrenaline, on the other hand, through the alpha-2A receptors in the prefrontal cortex. There has to be an optimal level of dopamine and noradrenaline for optimal prefrontal cortex functioning. And this is relevant to the prescribing of stimulants. Too much results in side effects, too little, suboptimal attention control, focus, impulse control. Therefore, an optimum level of DA and NA leads to better results.